Hello, ShotDeck community. I wanted to share with you a deck of shots that inspired Joker, but when making the deck, I realized it needed a little bit of a companion piece to explain the shots. So I'm making this short little video where I'll go through the deck and talk to you about some shots that inspired Joker and sort of also my philosophy on how I use ShotDeck to prep a movie. So here, I make decks for everything. Every project I've ever done, I make decks right here. You know, I just have minimized the ones and archived a ton. You can see in my archives down here on the side. I mean, I have ones from Godzilla. I have ones from War Dogs. I have ones from Dua Lipa music video. Rutherford Falls, which is a show I just directed 3 episodes of. Every time I start a project, I make decks. I know a lot of people use ShotDeck to pull images, make pitch decks specifically, lookbooks, all those things. I use that too. But also I just use decks to organize all my thoughts and to sort of start the process, the creative process, and get inspired. And so sometimes I just start pulling images and I'll break them down. Like if you look at my Romeo deck on the side here, I'll make a different deck and a different folder for almost every, I'll make one for Arthur's apartment, and I'll make one for the movie theater. I'll make one for color and composition and tone and all of these things. And what you're going to see here in this deck called Shots That Inspire Joker are just images that were part of those decks. And let's get into it. So this image here, which is from Sid and Nancy, is actually one of the first images I picked. This one and this one from Strangelove were the first 2 images I picked. And this was a good year out from shooting. Todd had just sent me the script. And I was just thinking about ways to sort of photograph this movie in both tone, looking for tone examples, contrast, all of that, as well as just some sort of odd, very subjective angles. And interestingly enough, I'll build these decks starting the first time I read the script, and all through prep, I use ShotDeck a ton. But sometimes, it's funny how you suddenly see its influence on the movie later. It's not like I go specifically to a shot like this that maybe has created subconsciously a shot like this from Joker. It's not like I go on set that day thinking about that shot from Strangelove to make this shot from Joker. The idea is that sort of over the process of building decks, you're infusing your brain and sort of dreaming on it and creating a texture that will later be its own movie, but you'll recognize the influences even later. This shot from Lenny was actually one in which it's probably more one-to-one. I just remember this shot from Lenny was also a really early pick. And I just love the idea of a stand-up comic being this full silhouette against the one direct light. So when we actually went into the location on Joker to create his stand-up comedy routine, this was definitely influenced by Lenny, this shot here. Oh, even so much as I had to sort of create this single spotlight that didn't exist in Dangerfields where we shot. But the idea of that soul comic in silhouette from Lenny was always very striking to me. This shot from Saturday Night Fever, amazing shot, super subjective, this crazy low angle. Sure, it might have influenced shots like this. Now, this shot was also more organic to the day, which was the way we philosophically shot the movie and operated the movie between me and Jeff Haley. We were very much ground level movie. The movie was always intended to not, we weren't having swooping crane shots, any of those things. We're always ground level. And our theory was, you sort of stayed where you were and just kept photographing the image. So if he stands up, don't stand up and get eye level with him, but instead sort of see the world from this sort of lower perspective. And so suddenly as he's dancing around and playing with the gun, he becomes this low angle image. So this would be an example of one that I don't think I even recalled I pulled this shot from Saturday Night Fever until I went back to sort of build this deck for you guys, specifically to see what shots, how they sort of ended up reflecting themselves in the final movie, which I hadn't done before this deck that you guys are looking at now. This is interesting because the only outside of the ground level philosophical thing that we did for shooting was the idea of establishing shots being high. The idea that when you saw him for certainly the first time in the movie, which is literally this shot, he would be insignificant in a much bigger world. So this is the first shot, opening shot of the, well, it's not the opening shot of the movie. It's the first time we see him in his world. There's the opening shot as he's putting on makeup. But the idea that uh, that you would see the world from a higher level. And there are good examples of that. Like Walter Mitty did a great credit sequence in which they photographed Manhattan at a higher level. Amazingly, the movie The Breakup, the Vince Vaughn movie, for a romantic comedy that you might not think has like a very distinct visual style, and all their establishing shots were actually like, 20, 30, 40 feet up. And I always remember thinking that's a really cool way to, because every time we do establishing shots, it's like, oh, it's an afterthought, or it's like, oh, and you end up doing it from ground level, or maybe you do it from a crane with a sweep, which we didn't want to do. But this idea that you could have just see the world from a higher perspective was something that always stuck with me. This shot, right, which is, from Munich, and you could see it in 100 different films, this kind of pure cardboard cutout silhouette. This led into something that Todd said to me, I don't know, a good 6 months, 8 months before we started shooting, which was this shadow self, this idea that we all have our shadow self. We have the self that we show the real world, and then we have this sort of other self that follows us around, and it's our shadow, but maybe perhaps the shadow self is our real self. And that was definitely something that was being explored visually in Joker. And for me, that really stuck with me. So I kept looking for opportunities to show either Arthur or later in the movie, once he's killed the guys on the subway and his life has now started transitioning into Joker, to find him in a sort of more of a pure cardboard cutout silhouette. And this is that scene with his mom when he's watching the news about the subway killings, and she's in the background and he sort of leans forward out of the light into this silhouette. So again, I didn't necessarily ever go back to this Munich shot, but it was this idea of finding the shadow self and then looking for other opportunities, right? This is from Birdman, but this is from Joker. This is also from Joker. As he's climbing the stairs to his new sort of up to perform his comedy act. That's also, obviously a very big transitional moment in his life. And then the other thing, this was very early on in that shadow self idea, was trying to find very specifically one place in the movie in which I could show his shadow big on a wall. And like this, of course, this shot from Trainspotting, we've seen it before, particularly when it's a disconnected shadow of sorts. And we tried something like that actually in the comedy club that got cut out, of this sort of disconnected shadow, but it was also something that Todd and I talked a lot about and I was sort of excited about, and whether a shot like this from Manhunter, but the shot in Joker that it's reflected is when he's running away from the subway and you see that large shadow on the wall before he starts running into the shot. And that was very much by design, of course. I was running back and forth from the DIT tent, trying to set that par on the ground, which would have a good clean shadow, and make sure that like the camera car, which was moving first, that Joaquin would enter and have that shadow be at the right timing for the camera car to come in. And then this shot, which is actually one of the rare shots, maybe one or two movies on all of ShotDeck that's actually from a DVD and not a Blu-ray. It's because Birth isn't on Blu-ray yet, which is killing me. And the minute it's on there, we're going to put it up. But this like image was so evocative to me, and I didn't know where it might show up in Joker. But of course, in that same sequence of him running away. Now, we'll soon have music videos too, but if we had also done a music video, it would have been an image from This Is America, the Donald Glover music video, in which he's running breakneck. That's a different shot from the sequence, but just that desperation running towards camera that Joaquin does in this scene. This, I pulled, and then, I love aerials. I always do my own aerials. I get up in the helicopter and we spend a day usually, and we try to get every aerial we need for the movie in one day. We did tons of aerials that aren't in the movie in Joker, but this one, this idea of Broadway, this is the 2-3 line running down Broadway all the way into Manhattan. When we got up in the ship, and sometimes you don't know until you're up in the camera ship and really searching around. This, we tried 3 or 4 passes just to make sure we could get, once we went up and saw the way that the subway line is like the yellow brick road into Manhattan, we were like, we got to make sure we really time a train in the backlight going towards the city. And later, we have the train going out of Manhattan along the Hudson River. This shot from Place Beyond the Pines was always one of my favorite. The idea that you would follow a car or lead a car, but do it at, 12 or 15 feet. And I remember talking to Derek Cianfrance, and asking him about this shot, saying how I loved, and he did a little bit of this in his HBO show, which is this idea that when you follow a car from another car, that you can do it a little higher up. I thought was always really something that stuck with me, and it was probably influential for many movies, but in this one, we actually did a shot that cut out of the movie that has some influences here. And then also I used the site to prepare and think about inspirations for scenes. And so obviously the scene when he's watching Chaplin on the movie screen and he's at the charity event, we had that thing where I was like, I know I want to create the idea that he's backlit by the projector. And so we looked at a real film projector, which caused a whole bunch of other issues. And in the end, we ended up taking a 4K DLP projector and Fode put it behind him. You know, we tried putting another LED light, we tried other things, but the idea that we could project some sort of image and create a little sort of flicker effect on that from Hugo was really influential, this shot, to then create the shot from Joker, which is here. So, and this is also another way you can think about how ShotDeck and the way I use it is it's constantly a conversation piece. You know, we don't necessarily build decks and then produce the decks and all that stuff. They live on ShotDeck and we share it. So for Joker, I shared all my ShotDeck images with the production designer, with the AD even, with Todd, of course, prop master, set dresser, all of those department heads. Because when you're thinking about, let's say, this shot from Joker, which is this whole scene in the bathroom at the charity event, and it's a build, and we built it, I kept thinking, well, I want, and this was very, very much a present thing in the whole movie, which is how do we create the lighting that is either practical or 360 in the way that we integrate the lighting into the sets. So I was like, well, maybe perhaps we can build a cove that has LEDs that can cove up and pervade a little wash of light, which obviously has a very high-end look. But that shot from the Aviator, in trying to sort of explain what I was talking about, this is sort of the reverse of it. In thinking about what we needed, I then searched out shots that maybe would help the production designer understand more what I was talking about. So this was less of a shot that I picked and then tried to, it was more of like I needed to have a reference to show the production designer what I was talking about with needing a little bit of an architectural cove of lighting. And that's then produced some of the changes we made to the set here. This shot, I mean, if you haven't seen The Conformist is probably one of the most inspirational movies photographically of all time for DPs. I think at large, for me, definitely. I pulled this image very early. I just always liked the idea that you, when thinking about day interiors, you could create a little strip of light through a window that a character could just sort of sit against. And again, I had to go back to Joker to find something that maybe was influential. And it's like funny how then when I went back and looked at the shot after he's murdered, what's his name? And his clown, colleague, he's sitting against that wall in that strip of light. And now, again, I never went back to look at that conformist shot, but I think it's like after you watch movie after movie, certain things stick in your head. And in going to this scene, my thoughts were, how can I make the light a bit violent? It's the end of the day. It's transitioning into him going to Murray Franklin at night. So I wanted it to feel like suddenly there was hard light coming into that room in sort of a sporadic way. And this was probably more kismet. I mean, Joaquin's sort of beautiful at the way he finds light in a set, and we never really told him where to go. The light just sort of existed within that set, but he certainly found it for this image, which was amazing. I didn't pull the image from Joker. You can find it. But this idea of an alleyway, there's an early shot from the first scene when they're beating him up in the alleyway. We don't do Dutch angles much in the movie. We did it twice. We did it once in the beginning in the alleyway and once at the end when his parents are murdered. But it was the idea of reminding myself, we should try it a couple times. And so I pulled this image, which is from The Crow early on, just to sort of look at that. And then a lot of ways that I'm using ShotDeck. Again, this is a production design one, sort of finding a location. This is a prison scene from Carlito's Way, but the idea that, Arkham is a bit of a prison. It's a psychiatric prison, but it is a prison. And, it's a facility for the mentally ill, but it's also like you're not really free. And this idea, this is actually a morgue at the same Memorial Hospital up on the Upper East Side where we shot the exterior stuff with his mom when she's in the hospital. This is actually the basement where the morgue is, and we shot this whole scene there. But again, it can help location departments say, hey, I want to find something with this kind of wall. Let's look for this kind of thing. Let's look for stuff that has fluorescence in the ceiling. Now, obviously, this location, we changed some things, a couple flickering fluorescents, and we sort of built this little records room in the back. But other than that, it's pretty ready to go. The Killing of a Sacred Deer, I discovered this movie during prep on Joker. I had never seen it. I loved The Lobster and I loved his work. I think The Favorite had come out already, if I recall, or maybe it was just about to. But this movie, the tension, the odd framing, the sort of just purposeful sort of, structural elements of the composition has just really inspired me for this movie. I love the color palette. I love the look. So this, again, the idea that you could follow somebody a little higher. And so when we chased Joaquin in this same scene, racing away from the records room, definitely I wanted to try to find a place in which we could follow him a little bit high. Now, we didn't have as much height. We're basically touching the top of the ceiling with the Steadicam running after him. But this idea that just, let's not ever be really at eye level. Like, we're either below him, we're above him, but this normalcy of eye level, let's try to not have that in the movie as much. Obviously, frame within frames are something that's super important. When we built the structure of the hallway, it was all about creating these frames within a frame. Lighting wise, the way to do this, and this is something, even since Garden State I've tried to do, is like, well, how do you create, obviously you've got a frame within a frame by the nature of a hallway, but in that silhouetted sort of idea, well, in order to silhouette somebody, you need light. So there's no real motivation for there to be window light at the end of this hallway. The hallway goes to nowhere. But if you make that the hottest point of the frame, one, it draws your eye, but two, it helps silhouette your figure walking away from you. So that was influential. This is also from Place Beyond the Pines, just, the scene when he's waiting outside the hospital was, again, never referencing these shots, but they live in a deck for me to sort of just, again, it sort of gets put in here, and then you never really know. Day to day, you're just shooting and you're trying to execute the day, and you're working all on impulse, and you're working all on kind of the speed of the day, which we like to work quickly. So the influences kind of already are captured through the weeks of prep and thinking and dreaming and watching movies and just kind of infusing enough things that suddenly when you're making the movie, some of the things come out throughout the course of the movie. This kind of running away down an elevator, down a stairwell, this is him running away after the records room. This loneliness, this idea of him in sort of just a desperate state as he discovers some truth about himself and his family. I love the mixed light from Good Time. I love mixed light always. I've loved it. One of the things when people ask about, like, you're making a movie that takes place in the early 80s, how influenced were you by the 70s? My biggest influence by the 70s, and here's a shot from Thief that also sort of shows that, is, in the 70s when they were doing it for real, this is from 1981, which is actually the exact, year that Joker takes place, it's that mixed light feel. It's the fact that, like, fluorescents were now being treated with clean fluorescence, uncorrected against film stock, would go either this, putrid yellow green or this like cyan green, and that it would mix in the same set with uncorrected daylight, like in here, but with a tungsten light and also green fluorescence. That's all exists in this shot in Good Time. And so it was more also to talk to the production designer, is that, in daylight scenes, you can mix this light in a beautiful way with the daylight, the uncorrected fluorescent, and the tungsten all in the same frame. This shot, interestingly enough, was more about contrast. We were going to shoot on film all the way up until the 11th hour. And when we didn't shoot on film, we decided to shoot Alexa 65 digitally. My biggest thing was to try to have references sticking with me all the way through coloring that would remind me of what film contrast is. Because I think when you shoot film, and I shot 25 movies or so on film, maybe more, you don't have to really think about the inherent film contrast. It lives within the film, and the color is beautiful and renders the full palette of spectrum of color, which digital is getting better, but it still doesn't quite do it. And it has more saturation than we think about. So you kind of have to remind yourself of all the things that are perhaps missing when you shoot digital, and then remind yourself going all the way to the finishing to keep some of those things, the contrast. Here's another example. The color, Place Beyond the Pines, also shot on film. Killing of a Sacred Deer, also shot on film. So like, as you approach that, obviously I like cyan, but you also have to remind yourself what cyan looks like on film, because cyan on film is true. This is an example of just the cyan that's in the background of this shot from Mean Streets. You know, this shot from Lovelace is actually shot digitally, I think. Well, I could be wrong. Wait, let me see. It says it on our site, of course. That's how I know. Let me see if we have it. Yeah, 416. Yeah, it was shot on film. Area 416. All right, there we go. So again, good example of film, right? Everyone always asks about Taxi Driver. These were my only two images from Taxi Driver that were in my decks. Again, more about city streets and color than they were specifically referencing Taxi Driver. And amazingly enough, Taxi Driver I hadn't watched in 10 or 12 years before Joker. I watched it for the first time a year after we made Joker, when I was interviewing Michael Chapman about the movie. Yeah, but it's influenced in the sense that, yeah, we're making a 70s movie, 70s, 80s look movie that has influences from the character studies of those days. And so, of course, we're going to be influenced by that. We're going to be influenced by Mean Streets. We're going to be influenced by Dog Day Afternoon. We're going to be influenced by all those character study movies of that time. So definitely Taxi Driver has a place because it's infused in the memory of your filmmaking language. This is more about dusk. I'll always have a dusk reference. So if when we shoot dusk, I have a good reference back for coloring. This is, for me, one of the best looking airy movies. You know, Chris Menges, who shot this movie, this was Harris Savides started shooting this movie. It's extremely loud, incredibly close. And he got sick before making a movie, and Chris Menges had to take over. And it was the beginning of Airy Raw. This was one of the first Airy Raw movies on the Alexa. And I just remember Menges, who does great color work in his movies, just nailed how the Alexa can be shot. And it was early, and it really showed that this format is here to stay, and this camera's amazing. And so I always keep that as a good example of a movie that has full color rendition. Again, these pics here, this one's from The Driver from 78, Walter Hill movie, also color reference for Night Exterior. This is from Rosemary's Baby. I never really did anything like that in the movie, this kind of idea that you would like almost spotlight somebody in a dark environment, but I just liked the shot, so it didn't come back in the movie in any way. This is again color and the sort of beautiful simplicity of Killing of a Sacred Deer. Not really any specific thing. It's just Nolan, and it's amazing. Fat City, which is Conrad Hall, again, for the cyan and the kind of, you know, that time of filmmaking and how color was rendered. But Connie Hall's the reason I wanted to become a cinematographer. So second reason was being there, which is Caleb Deschanel's work, and also this sort of, again, here they are on the street. They're actually making a movie about sophistication. Chauncey Gardner's character out right now is in the city. And so the city is not going to be clean whites. It's not going to be, even though he's dressed in a beautiful suit with a bowler hat, it's like he's filled with this mixed light and this cyan behind him. Again, this kind of mix of cyan that is also from Killing of a Sacred Deer. I love this color of the backstage from Magnolia. Let the Right One In, which is amazing, right? Hoyta's work, this frame within a frame stuff, which is always like super influential for me. So it just exists in decks for me to remind myself and the director, let's try this. This shot from Hudsucker, which is like above, we actually did do a shot that was kind of similar to this when he, in the movie, goes to visit Wayne Manor, or Wayne Tower, I should say. He goes, and it's a scene that's cut out of the movie, but I love this idea that if we are going to shoot from above, let's go really far. Let's make a real 2D image in which Arthur's character is as insignificant as possible. And we actually shot a bunch of shots like this. They just didn't make the cut. And this idea that if we are going to go wide, let's go really wide. And, some we shot really wide, like him walking to his apartment and he's just a dot and it's a huge landscape with like the world behind him, just to again show his insignificance. This shot, which is from the great, I don't know why it's getting through. It's, come on, it'll get me. I'll cut this out. From Last Tango in Paris. I don't know why it got through me. Again, I pulled this early. I was actually breaking Last Tango down while I was prepping. And I just thought I loved the sort of palette of that, that bathroom and the sort of pinkish color and that kind of thing. So again, maybe this pink tile and talking to the production designer and showing the image had some influence on that. This kind of pastel idea that in this world, and this like lovely little scene lovely or creepy, depending how you think of it, of him washing his mother's hair. I just love the palette of this, and Mark Friedberg did just such an amazing job. This shot from The Godfather, and this shot here from Killing of a Sacred Deer, this idea that a single practical can light a scene was definitely influential in the way we lit her apartment bedroom. This idea that what's the least we can do to light a scene, and the idea that the characters exist within the room. They existed within a living, breathing, lit room from practicals, and wherever they go, that's where they go. And like, you don't clean them up and you don't sort of like light the actor where they are. You light the space and let them fill it. That was very much a part of Joker. Also very, very, we see that a lot in Killing of a Sacred Deer, and Foxcatcher, a shot like this, which palette-wise didn't really show up in the movie, but I mean, it's, Greg Fraser, who's amazing. Same principle, right? This sort of single light source, this desperate kind of frame from above. This is him sleeping before the Murray Franklin show, or before he sees the news of the riots and all the people sort of like taking on the cause of the clown. But this above angle. So when we did go above, it was just sort of this God's eye view kind of idea. Again, hallways and frames within a frame. This is the cyan sort of showing itself into the movie. Of course, we have like a scene where he's on a cell phone. I always wanted it to be yellow in that little cell phone. I knew because we were shooting it in dusk, and I knew we'd have some mixed light from sort of a sodium vapor yellowy kind of thing, and the sodium vapors that we changed back in the city, because those don't exist anymore under the Brooklyn Bridge. They're now all LEDs. I just liked the idea that we would put this booth in there and put a yellow light in there. So this shot from Manhattan is like in the sea of equipment. And the idea was, when we shot and built the Murray Franklin set, I always knew that we would photograph all the units that were in the grid. So it was really important for me and Steve Ramsey, our great gaffer, to have basically any unit that was in this set was going to be of the decade that we shot. So, and that was really true, except for like TV screen lights, which we used LEDs, and the little cove lighting in the bathroom. We really tried to stay away from modern technological lights and stayed with old, space lights and old zips, 2K zips and 10Ks and 5Ks, anything that would be photographed, because I knew we would have scenes from the top behind the audience in which we would see. The whole idea is, you're seeing him on a show that he's witnessed his whole life on TV. But when we go there, we now get to witness the actual what it looks like behind the scenes. And that's like the new perspective that now Arthur has, or now Joker has, that he didn't have before. And then the last couple images are, again, the conformist, this psychiatric sort of asylum place that's in the movie, and this kind of white on white. Our view, because of like the film and the idea that the movie was a bit dirtier, became a little bit like white on with a little cyan mixed in, of course. But certainly the idea that now in a movie that has a lot of color, we're now devoid of color as he's at Arkham at the end, and he's in the psychiatric asylum. And then the final shot of the movie, you know, this was something Todd and I talked a lot about, and it's really subtle, and I'm not even sure people notice it, so I'm not sure what it is, but I remember this shot from Terminator 2 just being part of the deck, because he's like, well, it should be a hallway that he's walking down, and we should figure out, are we lighting it from one side? It's probably caged in because it's like a asylum. And what the main thing we talked about, which is different from what this is that at the end of the hallway, the idea that we would put a 20K and we would slowly dim it up as he's walking to it. So the final shot of the movie, this shot here, which is him walking down this hallway, we obviously have windows there and I have some light going through them, and we have the fluorescence above, but the main source was that he's walking towards a window that as he walks towards it, we're dimming up the 20K in kind of a, like, I don't know, it's like walking into the sunset, like this happy ending idea, you know, even with the end at the end of Joker, it's like this amazing thing that Todd does with tone. And the idea that, so at the end of that hallway is a 20K, and that's the last shot in the movie. So anyway, wanted to put all those shots in context. I hope if you're not using decks, you start using them, because they're a great place to store stuff. They never go away. So the beauty of it is I can go back to a deck I built from Godzilla and see some of my influences. I can see what the movie is, right? So that's the benefit too, is that you always have all the data with it. So that's the main thing about, like, you know, one of the ways we built ShotDeck was precisely for this idea that you would create decks within, not just, you know, outside of the site, but you would actually have decks that you would build for all your projects. So hope you enjoy that. Hope it was helpful or informative in any way. We'll keep doing more of our shot talks, and thanks for, you know, being on ShotDeck and using it. We'll see you next time.